the Zelda timeline. It is a topic of many controversies, and a lot of people hate it, a lot of people dislike it, because they think it simply is forced, weird, and doesn't make sense. I personally disagree. I actually have a huge Zelda theory that is in the making that you don't want to miss. But in the meantime, I want to talk about just this, the timeline itself, because I have some strong thoughts about it, and I think it is highly misunderstood. And there are two main controversies when it comes to the Zelda timeline. The first one being that the idea that it is just quickly thrown together by Nintendo in order to meet fan demands of getting some sort of connected narrative and lore with all the games in one connected, combined timeline. And they just placed the games wherever they thought would fit the best, with not really much thought behind it. The other controversy is the Downfall timeline, or the Downfall branch, which, if you don't know, is one of 3 different timelines that splits off after Ocarina of Time. Now, I believe that both of these are misunderstood greatly. And I would like to tackle the first one first. The idea that the timeline was never ever thought about or planned, or that all the games were just made as separate games and they were just quickly thrown into a blender and forced to be in a connected timeline by Nintendo back in 2011. Because when you start to really look at these games and when they were released and how they fit together, it doesn't really make much sense to me. It is important to know that the Zelda games don't really work in the same way as many other series do. When you have sequels and prequels, you usually expect there to be a lot of things that connect together, and in a prequel it helps explain what happens in the sequel, and sequel to continue the direct story that happened previously. But the Zelda games, they take place so far between each other most of the time, and they are supposed to be games that fit on their own, that work on their own and stand on their own. But that does not mean that they are not connected greatly. It simply means that this is how the story is told in this universe. It is supposed to be games that take place so far apart that you only find ruins and maybe some memories and distant legends and myths from the times long gone by. Because when you look at it, let's see how the games were released. We had Zelda 1, and the next game was Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, a direct sequel to the first one. Then we got A Link to the Past, which was a direct prequel to both of these games. Then we got Link's Awakening, which took place right after A Link to the Past, even featuring this very same Link that we played as in A Link to the Past. Then we got Ocarina of Time, which was supposed to be, at least, a prequel to A Link to the Past, which we will get back to, but it was still with in mind of the developers. This was supposed to be taking place before A Link to the Past, and that was always the intent. Then we got multiple games. We got the Wind Waker first, and the Wind Waker, just based on the opening alone, we can clearly tell that this was supposed to be a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, because it takes place, the opening that is, takes place right after the events of Ocarina of Time. It tells the story of how the hero of time came to Hyrule and saved the land from Ganondorf, and then he disappeared and never came back, which led to a catastrophe. This is the direct follow-up to the ending of Ocarina of Time. But then we also have Majora's Mask, which is also a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. But this time from when Link traveled back in time at the end of the game and remained as a child and continued his life from there. And already there, we had proof that a split timeline of adult and child was planned from the release of The Wind Waker, at least. Even when it comes to interviews from the developers and producers from back when The Wind Waker was originally released, they talk about how Ocarina of Time has 2 different endings. Already there, they have the split timeline set in stone. So this idea that the timeline split and the timeline as a whole was just made up on the spot is simply wrong. And it doesn't end there, because after The Wind Waker, we have Phantom Hourglass, a direct sequel to The Wind Waker, and we also have Spirit Tracks, another direct sequel to Phantom Hourglass. And furthermore, we had Twilight Princess, which is proven, and both in interviews and in the game itself, to take place long, long after Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time in the Child timeline. And from there as well we have Skyward Sword, which was made and marketed very heavily to be the origin story of this whole franchise. And then other games released later on, like Link Between Worlds and Echoes of Wisdom, which were clearly made to be connected heavily to games like A Link to the Past. So really, where this whole idea that the timeline was just thrown together comes from, I'm not sure, because everything is connected, clearly. Now the other controversy, the Downfall timeline. This is the interesting one, because the Downfall timeline, I feel, is heavily, heavily misunderstood. What the general idea of the Downfall timeline is in the community of Zelda, as far as I've seen at least, is that the Downfall timeline is simply a timeline Nintendo made up and threw all the games in there that they didn't know where to place anywhere else. It was one that was forcefully made in order to make, or at least try to make sense of how Ocarina of Time can be a prequel to both Majora's Mask, A Link to the Past, and Wind Waker at the same time. Basically, what the idea is that the Downfall timeline splits off from Ocarina of Time because Link is defeated by Ganondorf at the end of the game. And this causes problems, because if a timeline can split simply when the hero is unsuccessful, that causes an issue of, well, can't that potentially happen anywhere? And certainly we have a problem of timelines don't really matter anymore, because it is an infinite amount of them. And I don't like that. And I don't think at all that that is the case in this situation. Because when the idea is that the Downfall timeline splits off because Link is defeated, that makes the entirety of the Downfall timeline a sort of what-if timeline, or an alternate timeline that isn't really canon. It doesn't really happen. It is just a what-if Link was defeated. But that is the exact opposite of what I think is the case. Because for some strange reason, I see so many people that believe the split happens because Link is defeated. And yet, this is not claimed anywhere. Anywhere at all is this claimed. The only thing that is based off is that on the description of the timeline, on the Hyrule Historia and the other timelines as well, it is simply written, the hero is defeated. But that simply explains what the timeline results in. It does not at all explain what causes the split in the first place. Those are two very different things. The hero is triumphant and the hero is defeated are simply descriptions of what happens in these timelines. It does not at all explain why the split happens or what caused it. So why people have gotten the idea that Link being defeated is what causes the split to happen, I'm not sure. But I believe the reason is because we don't have any other official confirmation, any other official answer as to why the Downfall timeline splits at all. And so that is kind of the only thing we can base it on. And so that is the general conclusion. However, I think we simply have interpreted the timeline in a very wrong way. Now, for the sake of convenience, let me just remove these for the time being. We're going to place them back later. But for the time being and for the sake of clarity, let's only be left with this. And just for the time being, just try to remove the name Downfall and replace it with Original. I believe the Downfall timeline is not a split at all. I believe the Downfall timeline is simply the original set of events. This is what originally happened. Before any split happens, before any time travel happened, this was the original set of events. Link from Ocarina of Time, the hero of time, was defeated originally. He was not successful. The Downfall timeline does not split off from Ocarina of Time. It is simply the canon original set of events. Because if you think about it, how in the world does it make sense that Zelda 1, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, are all simply thrown away into a what-if timeline when they were the first 4 original games to be made, and were clearly made to connect to each other. So when Nintendo made Ocarina of Time, and they made the ending not lead into A Link to the Past, even though they said this tells the origin story, there had to have been a conscious decision and a clear choice to make this happen, to make the events of Ocarina of Time play out in a different way. And what does that mean? That means the downfall timeline is not a split at all, but the hero is triumphant, aka the adult and child timelines split off from the original branch. So the Ocarina of Time we see, that is the alternate ending. That is the alternate set of events. Not the downfall timeline, that is just how things originally went down. The adult and child timelines, those are the result of an alternate ending, of an alternate timeline. Instead of seeing Ocarina of Time as a single point that splits into 3 parallel branches, instead, don't look at Ocarina of Time as an ending at all. Instead, see it as a middle point in the original downfall timeline that goes from Skyward Sword through Ocarina of Time and all the way down to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. And through some events, time split off of this huge timeline into a set of events where Link was triumphant and defeated Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. But that begs the whole question, what could cause this split? Because if the split doesn't happen because Link is defeated, then surely it cannot happen the other way as well. It cannot be that the timeline split off from the original simply because, in an alternate reality, Link won instead of lost. The adult and child timeline split because Zelda used her time powers alongside the Ocarina of Time to send Link back in time, and this caused a split. Both events, both endings happened at the same time. But what caused the original triumphant split off of the original in the first place? It had to have been something similar, right? And I think the answer lies in the game that Ocarina of Time was based on in the first place. Namely, A Link to the Past. If Ocarina of Time was supposed to be a prequel to A Link to the Past, and Nintendo made an alternate ending that led to a different outcome, surely they must have had some thoughts around why this happened. They must have made a conscious decision to make events play out differently, and so they don't lead into A Link to the Past, but into a brand new path. What could this be then? What could this choice be, and what could it be based off of? This is the fun part, because at the end of A Link to the Past, Link makes a Triforce wish with a completed Triforce, and the wish is to undo all of Ganondorf's misdeeds. It is to undo the damage that had been done. It is to change history. This is known as the Triforce wish theory. It is not something new, but it is something that has been spinning around for a while. But there is something that I haven't seen been mentioned a lot regarding the Triforce theory. Because yes, if it is something that could be able to split timeline into a new alternate way, the Triforce is the best option, because it is the most powerful artifact in the universe as far as we know. But there is something else, there's a small little detail that I haven't seen been talked about a lot. Take a little look at this clip from Ocarina of Time, right before the boss fight against Ganondorf happens, and see if you can find and see something a bit unusual. Right before the boss fight happens, Link, to his own surprise, is magically and seemingly randomly healed to full HP. It comes out of nowhere, and it has no concrete explanation given to us. Link being healed before the fight against Ganondorf is, in my opinion, the direct result of the Triforce wish that Link made at the end of A Link to the Past. That wish and that healing of Link before the final boss is what turned the tide. It is what made Link victorious instead of him being defeated at the end of the game. It is what changed history, and it is what split off the timeline into the successful hero is triumphant split. In this case, if you try to not look at time as a completely linear thing, you can, in a weird way, see Ocarina of Time as a sequel to A Link to the Past. Because the events of Ocarina of Time, or at least the ending of Ocarina of Time, is a direct result of the events at the end of A Link to the Past. So in a way, 99% of Ocarina of Time is a prequel to A Link to the Past, but the last little bit of it, the final boss fight, is, in a way, a sequel to A Link to the Past. In my opinion, this makes much more sense than simply the downfall timeline being an afterthought that they threw in for the sake of it. The downfall timeline is not a split at all, because as I said, Link being defeated, creating a split, not only does it not make sense, but it is not stated anywhere. And so it makes much more sense that the downfall timeline is the original set of events, and because of the Triforce wish, time was split off into the hero is triumphant split, which again leads to the adult and child timelines. At least, that's what I think. Subscribe to the channel to see more videos from me. And again, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.